let's bring in TJ and we can all chat. Hopefully the layout works here. TJ, how you doing?
There we go.
Looking good.
He made it. He finally made it. Let's hear it from the crowd. Yay.
Welcome to the stream, TJ. How you doing?
It's great to have you.
Great to be here.
David just had to join too. He's just so proud of you. Not only the company that you built, but your transition to venture capital, which is the highest and best use of any genius's time.
We were trying to assign credit for your success, and we kind of broke it down like 80% David, 20% you. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, I mean 70-30 maybe.
70-30? Okay.
Yeah, got to give yourself a little credit.
A little more credit.
How's your what was your first impression of David back in the day? I got to ask.
You know, it was pretty good. First time I ever met Dave was a phone call where I'd already told like 5 investors the round was closed, and he somehow weaseled his way into the round anyway. So he must have made a pretty good first impression.
I think it was Skype. Was it phone?
Well, I was like at some conference and we kind of met at Skype on a Skype, but then we actually talked like the next day on the phone, and that's when that happened.
Mm-hmm.
You remember that?
I do.
I feel like your memory is more shot than that.
I know. It's a rare memory for me.
Thanks for letting that stick. Is that important for you?
Yeah,
Very
Dave,
meaningful.
I've been here on drug prices. Get this conversation started. It's been very exciting.
Were you my last question for David, were you worried that TJ would, sell secondary at the B and get too caught up in Porsches and that whole world, or did you know that
at the B and I bought an E63 wagon, so it did.
There we go.
There we go.
I was worried about TJ.
It's still my daily driver, actually. I still drive that car. So
I was worried about TJ selling drugs at the B. Honestly, that was amazing.
That's great.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Awesome. Thanks for joining.
Later, David.
Great to see you.
For you.
Cool. TJ, take us through it. What was your reaction to the news? How would you actually summarize what the proposal is? Because a lot of these press releases get written kind of aggressively, and then the actual implementation is very different. How are you processing the news, and what's your early takeaway?
Are you getting some of that context directly on True Social, or do you wait till it hits other parts of the internet?
Wait for the delay for sure. I mean, I think maybe helpful to like level set, like a lay of the land for folks that are kind of less familiar with the category. I think probably the problem I've been most focused on, and I've beat a dead horse on Twitter, is this rebate issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in many ways that's the most interesting part of the executive order, and it's the thing I'm most excited about. So today, if you're a normal consumer, you go to the pharmacy, you need to fill a branded prescription, it's like a higher cost prescription. Maybe you need an EpiPen and it's January and your deductible just reset, or you want to fill a GLP-1 at the counter and it's not covered by your insurance. You end up paying something like 3 to 4 times order of magnitude what that drug actually costs in the US. No, so I'm not even talking about like what it costs in other countries, but what it costs net in the US. So for like an Ozempic as an example, you're paying $1,000 or so, which is the list price, the gross price in the US. But the net price is actually $250. That's the price that the PBM, the pharmacy benefit managers, negotiated. And you've effectively paid $750 more than that drug costs. And that money is getting captured by either the PBM, the insurance company, or your employer, usually some combination of all of those things. And everyone's always bemoaned pharmacy benefit managers, obviously. They're kind of everyone's favorite punching bag, the middleman in healthcare, and they're capturing all this margin. And to some degree, that's true. But no one has come up with a solution that could be an alternative path that could work better, right? That's the sort of fundamental issue, is like, you can hate how the mechanics work today, but without an alternative, like without some alternative, it doesn't matter. And so I think what's most interesting about the EO is that there's a specific call out around requiring that pharma companies have comparable direct to consumer prices to list prices in other countries, right? So you take that as Ozempic example. Mm-hmm. In the UK, that's a $150 to $250 drug. Actually not that different from our net price, right? It's sort of similar. It's a little bit less, but it's like not that different. They're basically requiring pharma to have that sort of pricing available if the consumer is just paying cash, kind of paying out of pocket. And why I think this is so interesting is if you start having these things get priced in somewhat of a rational way for consumers, all of a sudden the need to negotiate these rebates and have all these kind of backdoor negotiations and these fees and all this stuff that creates the complexity effectively goes away because you have some version of rational pricing for consumers. So there's a bunch of other stuff in the EO, and I'm happy to get into some of the more nuanced complexities, but to me, that's pretty exciting if you actually have like normal, reasonable cash prices for the end customer.
So just staying on prices, is this confounded by the fact that in other countries they have larger government-sponsored healthcare plans? Or so when we talk about Americans paying higher drug prices, are we saying American consumers versus European consumers? Or are we saying that the same pharmaceutical company actually makes more money from a single dose in America versus Europe?
Yeah, so both is the short answer. But I think what's happened in the press that has really been challenging is that everyone always talks about the list price as the price in the US, right? And so the narrative, if you listen to like the rhetoric over the last handful of years, is like, we're paying 10 times as much for Ozempic, or we're paying 10 times as much for insulin. We're not. The list price is 10 times as much as a list price in the UK. We're paying, and it says this in the EO, this is definitely the truth, we're paying 2 to 3 times the net price.
Yeah, the Wall Street Journal here said that the list price for diabetes medication, Jardiance, was $611 for a 30-day supply in the US versus $70 in Switzerland and $35 in Japan. That's what you're talking about being not entirely accurate.
That drug is probably actually like $100 net in the US, $150.
Okay, got it.
So yes, more expensive.
Yeah,
like,
but not 20x.
That's interesting. And so I think you're hearing, and like, I think you're hearing a lot of the dialogue be about like all the downstream implications of R&D, and there's not going to be any investment if these prices come down in the US because we're the only ones willing to pay. That's an interesting conversation. People should have that conversation. It's pretty complicated and nuanced. But I think everyone can agree consumers shouldn't be paying 10 times as much when they get stuck with the full bill.
Yeah.
And certainly shouldn't be paying 3 times as much as the PBM is paying or their employer is paying. That to me is what's most interesting, is you could come up with it. There's a real credible solve here potentially for that problem, which I think is much more, it's compelling and interesting.
Cool.
How have you, what are your thoughts on the market's reaction? I think everybody expected this massive sell-off in pharma and biotech, and maybe it's because there was other news announced this morning. We haven't seen that, but
biotech markets went up by like 3%.
Yeah. Do you think people are processing this?
What we heard earlier was that it was kind of like a really, really bad scenario was priced in and this was less bad, so it popped. Do you buy that narrative, or what are you taking away from the kind of the market reaction?
Yeah, so the PBMs in Paris have gotten whacked, which makes sense if you think about the dynamic here. I think there's a lot of skepticism about how much this can actually be implemented and the success that they'll have. If you jump back to the last administration, they tried to repeal rebates, which is solving the problem I just described. It's sort of getting rid of this excess margin that's invisible to the consumer, and they failed. They got it pretty far along. It was like an admirable effort, but ultimately CBO shut it down because rebates do contribute to lowering premiums, and there's things that made it difficult to get rid of rebates. They also had an MFN approach on Medicare Part B drugs, so like drugs that are dispensed if you're in office, things like that, and that failed in the last administration. So I think my sense is it's some combination of, if the real punchline here is that effectively this is a backdoor way to get rid of rebates, it's actually not that big of a deal for pharma. Like, they're still getting their net economics. It's just bad for the middleman, right? So that's like one interpretation from the market. And then there's probably also just some skepticism about whether this will actually get implemented. And I think that's fair skepticism given the historical track record here.
What does this mean for pharmaceutical R&D, the way it's done? We talked to Zach Weinberg a little bit about NIH funding getting cut. There's debates about how research gets done in the Ivy League universities that spin out a lot of drugs. There's so many moving parts to actually get us what we want, which is probably just like a cure for cancer or just great new drugs, right? How is the actual pipeline evolving through all these different changes when you stack them all up?
Yeah, so if you jump to the other components of this beyond the consumer implications, that's where I think these questions become more relevant, right? So if there's really an MFN for the net price that we pay compared to other similar situated companies or countries, that would have potentially some of the impacts folks are concerned about on R&D. I think we're so far away from that, and that's so difficult to imagine truly getting implemented on face value that I'm skeptical that that's really the thrust of this EO. I really think it's potentially a better way to eliminate rebates than historically. I do think if you kind of play out, let's assume that all of a sudden Ozempic does cost $200 at the pharmacy counter, which I do think is a credible path here, and it would be reflective of what the true net cost. And all of a sudden, consumers are sort of just paying for most of these products out of pocket versus like bothering to use their insurance. And then you have pharma companies competing on price to win the transaction. That's actually, I think, how net prices come down ultimately, not because there is going to end up being some true kind of dead net MFN that they're able to execute against. So I think the debate about R&D is sort of, to me, just from a practicality standpoint, kind of 2 clicks away from where we are today. And I'm pretty focused on, can we just get to a place where consumers are choosing these products based on price instead of PBMs and other middlemen trying to determine price.
Why is the market for Ozempic so competitive on day one? You hear this whole narrative around patents and the whole idea is like, you should be able to incentivize this this heroic Herculean research effort because you'll generate all this value over the long term. And that certainly happened with Novo and their share price. But at the same time, it feels like the GLP-1s came out. There were like every major pharma company had one around the same time. Then there was compounding going on. There was it felt like they were already generic almost, but I know that they're not. But why did the market play out in this way? Is it just because it's such a dominant technology? Everyone was thinking the same idea or something? What happened there?
Because it was originally approved for diabetes, not weight loss, and that weight loss was a byproduct that they figured out was not a side effect, but also an effect of the products. And so when it caught the public's eye, it was already much farther along in its life cycle than a traditional kind of new indication, new drug.
Got it.
That being said, like the price dynamics with GLP-1s are not that anomalous. Like if there's a successful product and there's a known pathway, there's going to be other similar products that get developed. In the current ecosystem, supply chain, current structure, that does drive down net price. That's why these things don't cost $1,000 anymore. And that's why their net price is $200, $300, $500, depending on how new the GLP-1 is. So like the system actually kind of works okay right now. Like the price does come down based on competition relatively quickly. It just doesn't work particularly well for consumers in these instances where they're paying out of pocket. So
everyone else is wearing a hat, so I wanted to put on a hat.
How can you comment at all on Europe's existing solution? They have some complex system of price controls where they tell U.S. drug makers what they can charge, is what we heard from an earlier guest. But
yeah, somebody else was saying that this EO is like Bernie Sanders' dream. Is that true at all? Are these are we in like left wing or right wing territory? I can't even tell anymore.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to depend a lot on exactly what's being contemplated here, right? I think if the extreme interpretation is these are literally price controls that the government's setting, like, yes, I think you're kind of in the Bernie Sanders extreme version of managing these prices. I think if you take the other extreme and it's really focused on consumers and they say, well, look, either you can set reasonable prices for consumers that are somewhat comparable to list prices in other countries, or consumers can just buy these drugs from other countries and import them here.
Yeah,
that's not a price control. That's just actually opening up the market to more competition. So really, I think it depends on the exact implementation and what's being contemplated.
Yeah. Where are you seeing opportunity in startups in healthcare to kind of carve out value or deliver value in healthcare broadly right now?
I mean, as you can probably tell from my tweeting, I'm quite interested and how you pull forward shopping and pricing into healthcare. Like to me, that is the linchpin to make the category work better. It's a lot of the work we did at Amazon. As far as I know, it was the first time you could actually see an insurance price for something before you bought it in healthcare, which is pretty insane. And so, I think being able as a consumer to understand what your options are, how much they cost, what's available, and ultimately like transact in a very seamless way, I think is the most interesting thing. Now that could be like literally what feels like a marketplace, right? I think that's a very interesting opportunity in different categories. It could be utilities that make that possible. So like super clear like APIs for pricing. There's a bunch of permutations of things that enable that, but that's what I'm still.
How are we talking about APIs in 2025? Like it's the age of AGI, ASI. Like how do the insurance companies not have APIs? This is insane.
Yeah, I mean, what's going to end up happening, because similar to faxes, we still send faxes, but really it's just two digital interfaces on both ends. You're gonna end up with all these like phone agents that are talking to each other, but it's basically, I swear to God, I don't know if this isn't hyperbole. Like
This is crazy.
think like the insurance companies are gonna be like, okay, cool, like you want clear pricing and you're bombarding us with phone calls with your AI bots. We'll just give you like a dedicated AI bot, and you guys can like, prosecute this and figure it out. Like that's
Extremely
absolutely
bullish
what's
for
gonna
11
happen.
Labs. Yeah, this is going to be like voice agents win everything instead of just building an API. Are there any places where AI in healthcare makes sense or is exciting for you? There's like the super frontier research going on at DeepMind. There's protein folding is solved now. There's stuff like that. But then at the same time, I can imagine like the use cases you described being very real business cases.
Yeah, the voice agent specifically feels like an
Yeah.
area that's experiencing somewhat rapid growth, but the nature of that also means that it's probably, it is hyper competitive. So I'm curious if you think categories like that are even investable.
It's tricky, right? I think I buy that there's going to be a bunch of administrative efficiency in healthcare, right? Things like phone agents and prior authorizations and other kind of very laborious workflows. It's much less clear to me where that value accrues. I think that's the tricky bit. Like there's an argument that it actually accrues to the service businesses. Like that's historically where the value accrues in healthcare. And so maybe the most effective service companies can accrue that value by just being good at implementing AI. The place where I'm pretty convicted it will be valuable and will drive real venture returns is companies that are good at compounding those as differentiation for consumers. So as an example of before, it would have taken a human $40 to book you an appointment to see a specialist. If you can use an AI bot to do that for $2, that unlocks a new consumer experience too, right? It's not just like an administrative efficiency. And there's lots of these examples. That's probably what I'm the most excited about.
You mentioned compounding. What's your take on drug compounding?
Oh God, I'm quite vocally anti-drug compounding.
Why? Is it a quality issue or is it just a market dynamic issue? It feels like
He's an IP respecter.
I'm an IP respecter above the law and below whatever the right nomenclature is here.
Yeah.
It's twofold. I mean, I do think there are real safety concerns. Last time there was a prolific compounder compounding a commercially available product at scale was New England Compounding Center, and they killed 100 people with meningitis. Like happened.
Yeah.
Real, like not claiming that's going to happen here, but that is like the overhang from compounding. It also just it sort of outside of these temporary shortages very much violates IP law. And to the conversations before about whether there's any incentive to do R&D, well, if someone can immediately just copy your product, there's certainly no incentive to do R&D. It's much worse than some kind of price.
Is it kind of a beneficiary? Like, is there a boom in compounding because of the internet, or like is there a market force that's driving the increase in compounding, or is it just like no one ever thought to do the loophole before?
Well, the funny dynamic.
What was that, Jordy?
I was just going to say, it's not like people are compounding and then hey, we didn't have to do R&D. We're just sort of like going to compound to this and then we're going to pass the savings on to you. That's been like a big part of the messaging online. And it's like, no, like you're going to pay the same and like you're going to like it and just like be happy that you're getting the drug. It's been seemingly the story.
I think the market dynamic is rebates, right? If Wegovy or Ozempic was the net price for consumers because these are now out-of-pocket drugs and they're $200, $300, is there like much of a market for compounding, which are also $200 and $300? Like the reason that there was so much demand for it is because of this disconnect between list prices and net price, right? And so if that dynamic goes away, all of a sudden the opportunity for compounders to really gain share is minimized, right? Because like I can understand why someone would really not be willing to or could afford paying $1,000 a month and they can get the compounded product for 200. But if we're talking 200 versus 100 or 150 for a compounded product versus the real product, is a very different calculus for the consumer.
Yeah.
What percentage of doctors do you think are using ChatGPT on a weekly basis? And is there a big wrapper to be built there, just giving them a more HIPAA compliant version of ChatGPT? I can't imagine. Shouldn't be legal.
I mean, I bet it's like, I don't know, like using it at all on a weekly basis, like most doctors, I would imagine at this point. Using it like as part of their workflow all day, probably still a smaller subset, but definitely in the double digits.
Is that
good?
Is ChatGPT HIPAA compliant?
You're just asking the most obvious
Well,
question.
you don't want to be dropping like specific patient information into ChatGPT, but like you can certainly do and
generalized. You can do generalized.
There's other ways to do that, but certainly generalize like workups and notes, and like we're using it a bunch in one of the companies I'm involved with to help, automate the questionnaires or the notes or things that happen downstream for efficiency. Like makes tons of sense. It absolutely happens and will continue to happen.
Yeah.
Some of the biggest, I think everybody has this idea in their head that you're going to be able to go to, it's like AI doctor. I don't know what that looks like, right? I don't know if it's embodied. I don't know if it's a screen. I don't know if it's a...
That doctor is ChatGPT roughly.
Yeah, but I don't know. I don't necessarily know what the form factor is, but as an investor, is that a category? How do you think about that opportunity, right? At a high level, is that one company that's just going to
we've seen
dominate?
like Harvey for lawyers. Is there going to be
or is it more of like a co-pilot approach and it's just less exciting than it sounds? It's just more doctors can see more patients and deliver better service. But how do you see that category? Because it's just one of those areas that people always bring it up in the context of, everybody's going to have like an AI doctor.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, what does that actually look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think for sure the first step when you're trying to deal with symptoms and figuring out what's going on is going to be going to ChatGPT or another similar CX. Like, I'm pretty confident that's going to be the first step. It's not that dissimilar from the first step today, which is people were Googling symptoms and trying to figure out like what's going on, and it was just much less efficient, but ultimately like a very similar kind of flow. So I think that's for sure going to happen. I think the interesting question is, are the vertical players actually going to have a better differentiated product than the foundation models? That's a lot less clear to me. Like I still think the core foundation models, in my personal experience, are better at diagnosis and better at figuring these things out still, even though there are dedicated other models.
Well, and that's a big issue, right? You could have a wrapper that's specific for diagnostics, right? That you can message and say, hey, I have this skin thing, like what's going on? But that's like so infrequent. You're not paying $20 a month for something like that. If ChatGPT can do it 80% as well, and it can kind of get you on the right path. And so I don't think
ChatGPT eats WebMD.
For
sure.
I think the more interesting problem to solve, right, is like at some point you get through most of that conversation, you're pretty sure you figured out what's going on. You still need an intervention of some sort if there's anything moderately serious going on. Like you either need a prescription, you need labs, you might need some physical intervention, like you need something. And that's where nothing in healthcare has actually been digitized, right? Like if you think about this compared to other retail categories, which I do think is the right mental model, like ChatGPT is now implementing, Shopify checkout right in ChatGPT, right? So you can go from that, what should I buy, straight through to a checkout flow. No one's built that checkout flow in healthcare. Like you don't have a product catalog, you don't know how much stuff costs, you don't know like what's available to you based on your insurance. Like I think that's actually a more interesting problem for startups to go wrestle through, because ChatGPT is going to be pretty damn good at the things you used Google for before, and it's not going to deal with any of this stuff. And so the stuff I'm working on and spending a lot of time on is much more in like, how do you build the equivalent of product catalog in healthcare? How do you ultimately make it easy to transact? How do you make it easy to shop? Because that infrastructure still has to get built, regardless of where the kind of front door is into that experience.
Shopify for health, something like that. Can we do overrated, underrated, telehealth broadly? How are you feeling about telehealth?
I am bullish on the sort of usage of telehealth still. I'm probably bearish on most of the existing business models and monetization. It's probably the short bit.
What about overrated, underrated?
Existing business models. Have you been surprised to see like Hims almost second act in the public markets? Do you think they would even have had a second act if it wasn't for GLP-1s, or is there some underlying unlock that they have?
I mean, it's sort of like commenting on any meme stock, right? It's a tricky thing to have a strong opinion on it.
Well,
I think that's enough comment.
That's enough
right
commentary.
there. Overrated, underrated GLP-1s.
Underrated.
Underrated. What about some of the foundational AI applications coming out of DeepMind, protein folding, any of that stuff, moving the healthcare markets, or how you think about healthcare?
Not intelligent enough to have an opinion on that.
Yeah.
Too complicated.
Too complicated. Get out of it. Anything else?
Did you, when you were a pharmacist, was there a world, did you imagine a world in which you retired as a pharmacist, at 65, or did you like cars too much from a young age that you knew that you'd need to figure out another way to build a collection?
I think it was pretty clear that the working behind the counter was going to be a short-lived endeavor for me, if that's the question. Are you asking, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was pretty clear from the jump.
How much do you love being a venture capitalist now? Is it just the
I love
best?
I love it. I sort of like the second I took the job, I became an expert at everything. It was so convenient. It was
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, maybe
It's almost instant. It really is almost
take us
instant.
on a little world tour of all the geopolitical conflicts, how we would resolve them really quickly.
I'm just really happy that my first conversation on here was political in nature. That was what I was looking for.
Yes,
Right?
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
well, this
The
is
last
great.
question I have, just generally curious, given you guys are I'm sure do multi-stage, but I imagine given like are you like trying to pick, like are you investing in a couple companies a year? What's the goal for you? And I'm assuming you meet a lot of companies all the time that you like but don't end up investing because you're not like, you just more of from a conflict standpoint, if I do this deal and a better company comes around in 6 months or a year, I'll be conflicted out. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the first bit's accurate. We're doing concentrated early stage investing, kind of classic venture. So I'll do 2 to 3 deals a year in any given year is probably a pretty standard year for me and for the other partners at Matrix. I mean, I certainly think about the conflict thing. I think that pre-assumes that I'm constantly liking things and wanting to do all of them. That's probably not the dynamic. It's really like finding like really interesting things that I want to spend a bunch of energy and a bunch of time on versus seeing like a lot of different things that I'd love to kind of be less involved in. So
Yeah.
it's certainly a dynamic, but we're doing a couple deals a year.
As you do deals, when do you start using the term "we" to describe how the company works?
It happened pretty quick too. It was like the same as my expertise. It just
Yeah. Just immediately write some small check and it's we. We are building the future.
Yep.
Dropping a we as a venture capitalist is strong. Lets you know, hey, I'm on the board.
Yep.
I'm part of the team.
Don't
Anyway,
allow
this is
performer
fantastic.
operators, otherwise you're not allowed to.
What
Yeah.
what the last thing before you take off, what should people be paying attention to in the days and weeks from now around the actual implementation of the EO? What are you looking out for? I think it's obvious that you're not going to walk up to a pharmacy after work today and see lower prices. But what are you looking for?
I personally would be focused most on how much this is really about the difference between gross and net prices, right, which we talked a lot about, or whether it's really about true competitive net prices with other countries, because those are pretty different paths, right? And have all sorts of different implications. So I think the more this feels like it's about solving the consumer problem and less about solving the kind of payer problem or the fairness problem, the better for me personally. And the more it feels like we're trying to do some true price setting kind of net MFN against other countries, the more I'd be a little bit nervous. So that's where it pivots for me is this about consumer or is this about net MFN?
Great.
Do you think the Mission E makes it to production? Do you think Porsche goes a different direction with this next supercar?
You know, I know so little about like new modern Porsches. I'm like the furthest from an expert, but
Good luck
I
to
have
them.
no idea. It's the short answer. Ask me about something old, and I'll talk about it for a long time. But
Yeah.
Wow. We'll
We'll
be
have to do
coming
that
out
as a
your way.
follow-up.
We're working on putting together the Amman rally.
Yes.
So more news to come there. You'll be one of the first to know.
This is fantastic.
Awesome. Thank you for coming on, TJ.
Yeah, thanks so much. For
This was
joining.
great.
We'll talk to you later.
Appreciate the insight.
Bye.
Cheers.